Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The footprints changed species mid-stride, coyote to human to something with 6 toes, and Lisa Hoffman had no scientific explanation for what her eyes were recording. She crouched in the dust of the Chihuahuan desert, her digital camera clicking rapidly as she documented the impossible track sequence. Coyote prints clear as day, 4 toes and pad, the characteristic oval shape. Then, without any disturbance in the sand, without any indication of a second animal joining the trail, the prints became human. Bare feet, adult male, size 10 or 11. And then, 3 strides later, something else entirely. 6 toes arranged in a pattern that matched no animal in her field guides, no creature in her 4 years of zoology studies at Texas A&M. The August heat shimmered off the desert floor, turning the distant Chisos Mountains into wavering mirages. Lisa wiped sweat from her forehead and checked her notes again, as if the numbers might have changed. Temperature, 107 degrees Fahrenheit. Time, 2:47 p.m. Location, approximately 3 miles south of the Ross Maxwell Scenic Drive, Big Bend National Park. Impossibility of what she was observing. Absolute. She'd been a park ranger for exactly 6 weeks, fresh out of university, armed with a biology degree and a deep disdain for the supernatural folklore that tourists love to share around campfires. Lisa believed in facts, in data, in explanations that held up under scientific scrutiny. She did not believe in shapeshifters or skinwalkers or any of the other nonsense that the local communities whispered about when they thought rangers weren't listening. But the footprints didn't care what she believed. Derek Sullivan had been missing for 31 hours. The photographer had checked in at the Chisos Basin Visitor Center on Tuesday morning, filed a backcountry permit for a 3-day solo trip, and headed out with 2 cameras, a telephoto lens, and enough water for 4 days in the desert. His truck remained parked at the trailhead, his detailed itinerary sitting on the dashboard. He should have been easy to find. Except Derek had never reached any of the locations marked on his itinerary. His planned route would have taken him north toward the Window Trail and the surrounding canyons. But his tracks, and Lisa had found his boot prints, distinctive marrows with a worn left heel, had veered southeast instead, into some of the most inhospitable terrain in the park. No shade, no water sources, no reason for an experienced outdoorsman to deviate so dramatically from his plans. Lisa had been assigned to track him because she was the newest ranger and therefore most expendable if the search took longer than expected. The senior rangers were handling a medical emergency at Rio Grande Village, leaving her alone with a GPS unit, a satellite phone, and instructions to report back every 2 hours. She'd been following Derek's trail for 6 miles when the prints started changing. The logical part of her brain insisted on rational explanations. Multiple animals using the same game trail, wind and erosion distorting tracks, heat exhaustion affecting her perception. But the scientist in her, the part that had spent 4 years learning to observe and document without bias, knew what she was seeing. One set of tracks, one continuous trail, morphing between species with no physical mechanism to explain the transformation. Lisa stood and surveyed the landscape. Creosote bushes dotted the desert floor, their waxy leaves reflecting the brutal sunlight. A few scraggly mesquite trees provided inadequate shade. The Chisos Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks bare and ancient. Nothing moved in the heat. Even the lizards had retreated to whatever shelter they could find. The trail continued southeast, and Lisa followed, her water supply already down to 3 of her 4 bottles. She'd need to turn back soon, conservation of resources being more important than completing the search in a single day. But something pulled her forward, a growing sense of wrongness that intensified with each impossible footprint. 2 miles later, she found Derek's camera. It sat on a flat rock, positioned carefully, lens cap removed, LCD screen facing up. The camera was a professional-grade Canon, the kind that cost more than Lisa's monthly salary. No photographer would abandon such equipment deliberately. She approached slowly, scanning the surrounding area for signs of struggle. Nothing. Just the camera, sitting in the sun, and more of those impossible tracks circling the rock in a pattern that made her head hurt when she tried to follow it with her eyes. Lisa pulled an evidence bag from her pack and carefully lifted the camera. Still functional, battery at 60%, memory card 3/4 full. She turned it on and began reviewing the images, her scientific detachment eroding with each photograph. Derek had been documenting wildlife, coyotes, ravens, a desert bighorn sheep at a distance. Normal photos, professional quality, exactly what she'd expect from a nature photographer. But the sequence changed around image 487. The subject remained a coyote, a healthy adult with reddish-gray fur, photographed from perhaps 20 yards away. Image 487 showed the coyote in profile. Image 488 showed it facing the camera. Image 489 showed it standing on its hind legs. Lisa's hands began to shake. She told herself it was dehydration, fatigue, the heat playing tricks. But she'd seen coyotes her entire life. They didn't stand upright like humans. They didn't maintain balance in a bipedal stance. They didn't stare directly into camera lenses with expressions that looked almost calculating. Image 490 showed the coyote mid-transformation. Its front legs were lengthening, paws becoming hands, snout shortening. The photo was slightly blurred as though Derek's hands had been shaking, but the image was clear enough. The coyote was changing shape. Image 491 showed a naked human figure. Male, indeterminate age, covered in dust and dried blood. The figure was smiling at the camera. Image 492 showed the figure closer, much closer, as though it had crossed 15 yards in the time it took Derek to advance the frame. Image 493 was black. Not deleted, not corrupted, just black, as though the lens cap had been replaced. But the metadata showed the shutter had fired, the aperture had opened, light had entered the camera. Something had simply absorbed all of it. Images 494 through 5 on 12 were black. Image 5 on 13 showed Derek Sullivan's face, a selfie taken at an awkward angle. His expression was pure terror, mouth open in a scream, eyes wide. But it was his eyes that made Lisa's stomach drop. They reflected something standing directly behind him, something tall and wrong-shaped, with too many joints in its limbs. That was the last image on the card. Lisa's satellite phone rang, the tone obscenely loud in the desert silence. She fumbled it from her belt, nearly dropping it in her haste. "Hoffman, this is base. Status report." It was Sam Chen, the lead ranger, his voice crackling through the satellite connection. Professional, concerned, expecting good news. "I found Sullivan's camera," Lisa said, her voice steadier than she felt. 3 miles southeast of his intended route. No sign of Sullivan himself. "Any indication of what happened?" Lisa looked at the camera in her hand, at the final image still displayed on the screen. She thought about her reputation, about being the rookie with the biology degree, about the importance of maintaining credibility. She thought about rational explanations and scientific methodology, and the fact that what she'd seen couldn't possibly be real. "The camera shows some unusual images," she said carefully. "I think Sullivan may have been experiencing heat exhaustion or dehydration. Hallucinations. He might have abandoned his equipment and continued on foot in a confused state." The lie came easily, and she hated herself for it. But the truth was impossible to voice. "I found evidence of a shape-shifting creature that violates every principle of biology I've ever learned." The words wouldn't form. "Copy that. How's your water situation?" 3 bottles remaining. I can continue searching for another 2 hours." "Negative. Turn back now. We've got a storm system moving in from the west. Wasn't supposed to hit until tonight, but it's accelerating. You need to be back at your vehicle before it arrives." Lisa looked west. The sky was clear, brilliant blue, not a cloud visible. "I don't see any storm." "It's coming. That's an order, Hoffman. Mark your position, leave a trail marker, and head back. We'll resume the search tomorrow with a full team." She wanted to argue. The rational part of her brain said Sullivan was out here somewhere, probably injured, definitely in danger. But the other part, The part that had seen those photographs, the part that had been following impossible footprints for miles, was relieved to have an excuse to leave. Understood. Heading back now. Lisa placed a reflective marker at the camera's location, recorded the GPS coordinates, and began the return journey. She kept Derek's camera in her pack, along with her own documentation of the morphing footprints. Evidence, proof, data that contradicted everything she'd been taught but existed nonetheless. The wind picked up as she walked, sudden and fierce, carrying dust that stung her exposed skin. She pulled her bandana over her mouth and nose, squinting against the grit. Sam had been right about the storm. The western sky was darkening rapidly, clouds appearing as if conjured from nothing. Thunder rumbled, impossibly loud for clouds that seemed miles away. Lightning forked across the sky, brilliant against the sudden darkness. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, the desert's infamous weather volatility on full display. Lisa increased her pace, checking her GPS every few minutes to ensure she stayed on course. The landscape looked different in the stormlight. Familiar landmarks transformed into threatening shapes. A cholla cactus became a crouching figure. A yucca plant became reaching arms. She was 3 miles from her vehicle when she heard the voice. Lisa. Her name, spoken in her mother's voice, coming from somewhere to her right. Lisa stopped, her hand automatically reaching for her radio. Lisa, honey, I'm lost. Can you help me? Her mother was in Dallas, 250 miles away, probably having lunch with friends at the country club. Her mother had never been to Big Bend, had never expressed any interest in visiting the desert. Her mother's voice should not be here. Lisa, please, I'm scared. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was wrong, impossible, a trick. But the emotional part, the daughter part, wanted desperately to respond. Lisa turned toward the voice, her hand on her pepper spray canister. Nothing, just empty desert and gathering storm. I know what you are, Lisa said aloud, her voice shaking but firm. I don't know how you're doing this, but I know it's not real. Laughter answered her, but it wasn't her mother's laugh anymore. It was Derek's laugh. She knew it without knowing how, rich and male and utterly wrong coming from the empty air. Not real? The voice said, and now it was her own voice, Lisa's voice speaking her words. You saw the photographs, you followed the tracks, you know I'm real. You just don't want to believe. A shape detached itself from behind a boulder 30 feet away. At first, Lisa thought it was human. Rough silhouette, bipedal stance. But as it moved closer, the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, legs jointed backward, head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. What are you? Lisa whispered. Yenald Lushi, it said, the word harsh and guttural, nothing like the voices it had been imitating. Skinwalker, shape stealer. The thing your textbooks say doesn't exist. It moved closer, and Lisa could see it more clearly now in the stormlight. It wore skin like a garment, ill-fitting and loose, as though the form underneath didn't quite match the shape it was trying to project. The face shifted, cycling through features. Derek's face, her mother's face, her own face reflected back at her. You've been following me, Lisa said, backing away slowly, her hand still on the pepper spray, though she knew it would be useless. You've been following me, it corrected. Following Derek's trail, following what I wanted you to follow. You needed to see, you needed to know. The skeptics are always the most delicious to break. Where's Derek? The skinwalker gestured vaguely toward the mountains. Wearing him. Was wearing him. He lasted 3 days before the meat spoiled. Bodies break down so quickly in this heat. I've moved on to something fresher now. It took another step closer, and Lisa saw that it was standing on coyote paws despite the human torso, that feathers were growing from its shoulders despite the mammalian skull, that nothing about it followed any biological rules she understood. Why are you showing yourself to me? Because you're perfect, it said, and all the stolen voices spoke together now, a chorus of victims. Young, educated, certain of your superiority. You came out here believing in nothing but what you could measure and categorize. Breaking that certainty, watching your worldview shatter, that's sweeter than any flesh. Lisa ran. Training and protocol forgotten, she simply turned and sprinted across the desert floor. Jumping creosote bushes, dodging cacti, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard laughter and the sound of something moving fast, too fast, closing the distance. The storm broke fully overhead. Rain fell in torrents, the kind of desert downpour that could turn dry arroyos into raging rivers in minutes. Lightning struck close enough that Lisa felt the electricity raise the hair on her arms. Thunder shook the ground. She fell, her boot catching on a rock, her ankle twisting with a spike of pain that made her cry out. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs and rolled onto her back just in time to see the skinwalker standing over her. It leaned close and she could smell it now. Wet dog and rotting meat and something else, something chemical and wrong. Its face cycled through a dozen stolen faces, none of them quite right, all of them wearing expressions that matched nothing in human experience. I could take you now, it said. Wear your skin, walk in your world, use your credentials to access places I've never seen. How long before anyone noticed? Days? Weeks? Would your mother know? Lisa's hand found a rock, sharp-edged and heavy. She swung it with all her strength, aiming for the creature's head. The rock connected, and the skinwalker recoiled with a shriek that sounded like tearing metal. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and ran again. The rain was blinding now, turning the desert into a confusion of water and mud. She could barely see 5 feet ahead, but she knew the general direction of her vehicle, knew she had to reach it, had to get away. The skinwalker's voice followed her, coming from all directions at once. You can't escape, you've seen me. You're marked now. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I'll be there. In the shadows, in the faces of strangers, in your dreams. You'll never know what's real again. Lisa's vehicle appeared through the rain, her Park Service pickup sitting exactly where she'd left it. She fumbled for her keys, hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice before getting the door open. She threw herself inside, slamming the door, locking it, knowing that locks wouldn't stop something that could change its shape. The engine started on the first try. Lisa threw the truck into gear and accelerated, not caring about the rough terrain, just needing to move, to escape, to reach civilization. The storm made driving treacherous. The dirt road transformed into slick mud, but she pushed forward, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Something was running behind her. She caught glimpses of it in the lightning flashes. Sometimes coyote, sometimes human, sometimes something else entirely, but always keeping pace with her truck, matching her speed, its eyes glowing in the darkness. The main road appeared, blessed asphalt, solid and real. Lisa turned north toward park headquarters, accelerating to speeds that were dangerous in the storm, but less dangerous than what followed. The creature fell back, unable or unwilling to pursue her onto the populated road. But she didn't slow down until she reached the visitor center. Sam Chen met her at the door, concern written across his face. Hoffman, what happened? You look like hell. Lisa opened her mouth to tell him everything, the photographs, the tracks, the encounter. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain what she'd seen when it contradicted everything she'd built her education and career upon? How could she admit that the folklore she'd dismissed was real, that the monsters were real, that her entire understanding of the world was fundamentally flawed? I got caught in the storm, she said instead. Twisted my ankle, lost the trail. I marked the location of Sullivan's camera before heading back. Sam studied her face, and she knew he saw more than she was saying. But he was a good ranger, respectful of boundaries, and he didn't push. Get yourself checked out at the clinic. We'll debrief in the morning when the storm passes. Lisa drove to her quarters in the park housing, a small trailer that had seemed charming when she'd arrived 6 weeks ago. Now it felt exposed, vulnerable, with windows that showed only darkness and rain. She locked every door, drew every curtain, and sat in the middle of the floor with her back against the wall where she could see every entrance. Derek's camera sat on the table, its memory card full of impossible images. Lisa's own camera held photos of the morphing footprints, evidence, proof, data that would destroy her credibility if she shared it and haunt her forever if she didn't. She thought about calling her advisor at Texas A&M, Dr. Robertson, who'd supervised her thesis on desert predator behavior. She imagined his reaction to her report. Dismissed as heat exhaustion. Recommended for psychological evaluation. Career over before it truly began. The scientific method demanded reproducible results, peer review, objective observation. But how could she reproduce an encounter with a creature that shouldn't exist? How could peers review data that contradicted every principle of biology? How could observation be objective when the observer's sanity was in question? Lisa opened her laptop and began typing a report. Official language, careful descriptions, clinical detachment. She detailed the search, the discovery of the camera, the approaching storm, the difficult return journey. She made no mention of impossible footprints or shape-shifting creatures or voices in the desert, but she couldn't delete the photographs. Instead, she created a hidden folder, password protected, and transferred all the images, Derek's and her own. Evidence she couldn't share but couldn't destroy. Proof that she wasn't crazy, that what she'd experienced was real, even if real made no sense. The storm raged through the night. Lisa didn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. Rain on the roof, wind against the walls, branches scraping against the trailer. Once she heard scratching at her door, slow and deliberate, and she sat frozen with her pepper spray in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other until the sound stopped. At dawn, the storm passed as suddenly as it had arrived. The desert washed clean and eerily beautiful in the early light. Lisa forced herself to shower, to eat, to prepare for the debrief. In the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her eyes held shadows that hadn't been there 2 days ago, and her hands still shook despite the coffee and forced calm. Sam was waiting at headquarters with 3 other rangers and a search and rescue coordinator from Alpine. They spread maps across the conference table and listened as Lisa provided her official report. She marked the location where she'd found the camera, outlined the route she'd taken, noted the storm's intervention. "We'll send out a full team this morning," the coordinator said. "Weather's clear and we've got volunteer trackers from the sheriff's department. If Sullivan's out there, we'll find him." But they didn't find him. The search continued for 7 days, covering a 20-square-mile area, deploying helicopters and drones and experienced trackers. They found no trace of Derek Sullivan beyond his camera and the initial tracks that Lisa had followed. It was as though he'd simply vanished from the desert. On the 8th day, the search was suspended. Missing person case turned cold, filed away with dozens of others who'd vanished in national parks over the decades. Derek's family held a memorial service in Houston. The media ran stories about the dangers of solo hiking. The official report cited probable heat exhaustion and disorientation. Body never recovered. Lisa stayed at Big Bend for another 3 months. She filed her reports, led nature walks, answered tourist questions about desert wildlife. She never mentioned skinwalkers or shapeshifters or impossible transformations. She became known for her strictly scientific approach to ranger work, her refusal to entertain supernatural speculation, her insistence on rational explanations. But she saw things. Movement in her peripheral vision that disappeared when she looked directly. Coyotes that watched her with 2 intelligent eyes. Hikers whose proportions seemed slightly wrong, whose faces shifted in the brief moment between seeing and recognizing. She never confronted these observations, never investigated, never allowed herself to acknowledge what she suspected. At night, she reviewed the photographs. Derek's camera had captured truth and she'd been the one to find it, the one to document it, the one to choose silence over revelation. The scientist in her was dying slowly, suffocated by lies of omission, but the survivor in her knew that some truths were too dangerous to speak. She requested a transfer in November. The official reason was career advancement, a position at Rocky Mountain National Park, higher elevation, different ecosystem, better opportunities. The real reason was that she couldn't stay in the desert anymore, couldn't patrol the same trails, couldn't risk another encounter with something that had marked her as its favorite toy. Her last day at Big Bend was cold and clear, unusual for late November. Lisa packed her trailer, loaded her truck, and drove slowly through the park one final time. At the turnoff to Ross Maxwell Scenic Drive, she stopped. 3 miles southeast of that road was where she'd found Derek's camera, where she'd encountered the skinwalker, where her certainty had shattered. Something moved in the creosote bushes beside the road. Lisa tensed, her hand on the door lock, but it was just a coyote. Normal, 4-legged, moving with the characteristic lope of its species. It paused at the roadside and looked directly at her vehicle. For just a moment, its eyes caught the light wrong. For just a moment, it stood a bit too tall, its front legs a bit too long. For just a moment, it smiled. Then it was gone, vanished into the desert as though it had never been there at all. Lisa drove north without looking back. Behind her, Big Bend National Park stretched across the Chihuahuan Desert, vast and ancient and full of secrets that didn't appear in any ranger manual. Somewhere in that wilderness, things moved that defied categorization, that violated every principle of biology, that existed in the spaces between scientific certainty and ancient knowledge. She reached Colorado a week later and threw herself into her new position. Rocky Mountain National Park was different. Forests instead of desert, cold instead of heat, elk and bears instead of coyotes and javelinas. She told herself the change would help. That distance would restore her equilibrium, that she could rebuild the scientific worldview that Big Bend had destroyed. But on winter nights when the wind howled through the pines, Lisa sometimes heard voices in the storm. Her mother's voice, Derek Sullivan's voice, her own voice calling to herself from the darkness. She never investigated, she never responded. She simply locked her doors, drew her curtains, and waited for dawn. The photographs remained on her laptop, hidden and password protected. Sometimes she opened the folder and studied them, trying to find some rational explanation she'd missed. Some trick of light or camera malfunction that could account for what Derek had captured. But the images remained impossible, a documented sequence of transformation that shouldn't exist. She thought about Derek often, wondered what his last moments had been like. Had he understood what was happening? Had the skinwalker made him offers, shown him visions, played with his sanity before taking his skin? Or had it been quick, merciful, a simple predator consuming prey? Lisa knew she'd been given a different fate. Not death, but doubt. Not consumption, but corruption of everything she'd believed. The skinwalker had told her she was marked, that she'd never know what was real again, and it had been right. Every interaction held potential deception. Every face could be a mask. Every voice could be stolen. She continued her work, maintained her professional reputation, earned praise for her dedication and attention to detail. But the scientist she'd been, certain, arrogant, dismissive of anything that couldn't be measured, that person had died in the Chihuahuan Desert. What remained was something else. Someone who understood that the world held more than textbooks acknowledged, who knew that folklore carried truth, who'd looked into the eyes of something impossible and survived. Years later, when she trained new rangers, Lisa would tell them to trust their instincts, to respect local knowledge, to understand that not everything in the wilderness could be explained or categorized. The younger rangers, fresh from universities with their degrees and their certainty, would nod politely and think her overly cautious. She never told them why. She never shared the photographs. She never mentioned Derek Sullivan or Big Bend or the thing that had worn too many faces. Some knowledge was too dangerous to pass on, some truths too heavy for others to carry. But on quiet nights when the park was empty and the darkness pressed close, Lisa would stand on her porch and watch the tree line, waiting, watching, knowing that somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness that stretched across America, things moved that science couldn't explain. Things that remembered her name. Things that might someday come calling. The skinwalker had marked her, and marks like that never faded. She carried it in the photographs she couldn't delete, in the memories she couldn't share, in the certainty she could never reclaim. The price of seeing truth was living with it, and Lisa paid that price every single day. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. David, you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The voice on the radio belonged to Sarah Chen, the veteran ranger who'd trained David Ramirez for the past 4 months. But something was wrong with it. The cadence was off, words coming too fast, syllables running together like she was speaking through water. Sarah? Ramirez pressed the transmit button on his Motorola radio. You're breaking up. Say again? Don't trust what you see. Don't trust what you hear. Don't trust. Static swallowed the rest, then cleared. Following you. It's been following you since Cades Cove. Check behind you. Check now. Ramirez spun, hand dropping instinctively to the can of bear spray on his belt. The trail behind him was empty. Just the standard Appalachian summer afternoon, all green humidity and cicada buzz. He was 3 miles up the Anthony Creek Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, well within the boundaries of the most visited park in America. It was July 2015, 78 degrees, and there were probably 50 other hikers within a 2-mile radius. Nothing to be afraid of. Sarah, I don't see anything. What's going on? No response. Just static, then silence. Ramirez had been a park ranger for exactly 4 months and 6 days. This was his first real assignment after training, his first solo patrol, his first time being responsible for anything more serious than giving directions to tourists. He'd taken the job because it seemed safe. Great Smoky Mountains wasn't Denali or Yellowstone, wasn't somewhere you had to worry about grizzlies or avalanches. It was a tourist park, family-friendly, the kind of place where the biggest danger was usually someone trying to take a selfie with a black bear. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Sarah's voice. It was his voice, David Ramirez's voice, speaking words he wasn't saying. Turn around. Look behind the big oak, 3rd tree from the trail. You'll see. Ramirez's blood went cold. He wasn't transmitting. His finger wasn't on the button, but his own voice continued, calm and helpful. Connor Burke is there. What's left of him? You wanted to find him, didn't you? 4 days missing, presumed lost, but he's not lost. He's very, very found. Connor Burke. The missing person case that had brought Ramirez out here in the first place. 35 years old. Professional photographer. Last seen on July 18th hiking the Anthony Creek Trail with enough camera equipment to film a documentary. His wife had reported him missing when he didn't return to their rental cabin. Standard procedure. Check his last known location. Look for signs of injury or distress. Probably find him with a twisted ankle waiting for help. Except now Ramirez's own voice was coming through the radio, telling him to look behind a tree. He approached the oak slowly. It was massive, probably 300 years old, trunk thick enough that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle it. The bark was scarred with deep gouges that looked fresh, sap still weeping from the wounds. And behind it, partially hidden by a tangle of rhododendron, Ramirez's stomach lurched. It was a pile of clothes. Burke's clothes, based on the description from the missing person report. North Face hiking pants, REI shirt, Morel boots. They were arranged carefully, almost lovingly, folded and stacked like someone had taken them off to go swimming. But there was no body, just the clothes, and inside them, fur. Dark fur, coarse and thick, mixed with what looked like skin that had been shed like a snake's. And on top of the pile, Burke's Canon 5D Mark III camera, lens pointing up at the canopy. The power light was on. Recording. Ramirez grabbed the camera, hands shaking. The LCD screen showed 3 hours, 47 minutes of footage. He hit play, and Connor Burke's face filled the frame, sweating, terrified, whispering directly into the lens. If you're watching this, don't come looking for me. I'm not myself anymore. It started 3 days ago. I was photographing a deer near Cades Cove and I saw something wrong with it. Its legs were bending backward and its eyes, God, its eyes were human. It saw me seeing it, and it smiled. Burke's hands were trembling so badly the image shook. That night I heard my wife's voice outside my tent. But she wasn't on this trip. She was back at the cabin. The voice sounded exactly like her, calling my name, saying she was lost and needed help. I almost went out. Almost. But I looked through the tent flap and saw The image jerked as Burke fumbled with the camera. When it steadied, it showed the tent entrance. Through the mesh, something stood in the moonlight. Roughly human-shaped but wrong, proportions off, moving with a fluidity that made Ramirez's eyes hurt. And its face cycled through expressions like someone flipping through a photo album. Burke's wife, then Burke himself, then people Ramirez didn't recognize, then faces that weren't quite human at all. "Skinwalker," Burke whispered. "I'm from Arizona originally. My grandmother was Navajo. She told me stories about Yinald-Lushi, witches who wear animal skins to transform. I thought they were legends, metaphors. But this thing, it's real, and it's hunting me. And I think—" Burke's voice broke. "I think it's getting inside me. I feel it in my head, thoughts that aren't mine, hunger for things I shouldn't want. My hands. Look at my hands." He held them up to the camera. The fingers were too long, joints bending at extra angles, and the skin was peeling, revealing dark fur underneath. "It touches you and you change. It gets in through your skin, through your thoughts. It wears you like a costume. And the worst part is—" Burke's eyes filled with tears. "The worst part is it feels good. It feels right. Like I'm finally becoming what I was always supposed to be." The video ended. Ramirez dropped the camera like it had burned him. His radio erupted with sound, not static this time, but voices, dozens of them, all talking at once. Some sounded human, others didn't. And threading through all of them was Sarah Chen's voice, saying over and over, "Don't let it touch you. Don't let it touch you. Don't let it—" A branch snapped behind him. Ramirez turned and saw a deer standing on the trail. Normal white-tailed doe, probably 120 pounds, watching him with liquid brown eyes. Except deer didn't stand that still. Deer didn't stare without blinking. And deer absolutely didn't smile. Its jaw unhinged, dropping far too low, revealing teeth that were flat and human-looking. When it spoke, the voice was Connor Burke's. "You're wondering if I'm still in here. I am. Sort of. It's hard to explain. We're both here now. Both sharing. It's not so bad once you stop fighting." Ramirez backed away slowly. The deer, the thing that looked like a deer, took a step forward, and its front legs bent backward with a wet cracking sound. It rose up on its hind legs, body elongating, spine extending. The fur rippled like water, revealing patches of human skin underneath. And the face was Connor Burke's. But it was also still deer, features overlapping impossibly, existing in the same space. Deer snout and human nose, antlers growing from Burke's temples, eyes that were both brown and yellow and hungry. "It wants to meet you," Burke said through that impossible mouth. "It's been watching you for days, ever since you started working here. Fresh meat, untrained, vulnerable, perfect." "What are you?" Ramirez managed, voice cracking. "I told you. Skinwalker, Yinald-Lushi. The ones who walk on all fours wearing skins that aren't their own. We're old, David. Older than your parks, older than your governments. We were here when these mountains were young, and we'll be here when they're dust." The thing that wore Burke took another step closer. Its body kept shifting, deer to human to something in between, never settling on one form. "The Navajo know about us. They have rules. Don't say our name after dark. Don't look if you hear your name called in the woods. Don't follow voices. Don't—" It smiled wider. "Don't let us touch you." Ramirez ran. Behind him, laughter echoed. Burke's laugh, then Sarah's, then his own. Then sounds that weren't laughter at all, but something that mimicked the emotion without understanding it. The forest erupted with noise, footsteps running parallel to him on both sides, branches breaking, voices calling his name in a dozen different pitches and accents. He burst off the trail into thick undergrowth, rhododendron slapping his face, thorns catching his uniform. No destination in mind, just away, just not here, just anywhere but near that thing that had been Connor Burke and was now something else entirely. A hand grabbed his shoulder. Ramirez screamed and spun, bear spray already in his hand, finger on the trigger. But it was Sarah Chen. Actually Sarah this time, looking just as terrified as he felt. "David, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. The radio's been compromised. It's been imitating me, hasn't it? Ramirez nodded, gasping. Burke. I found Burke. I know. I've been tracking it for 3 days, ever since we found the first body. Sarah grabbed his arm, pulling him deeper into the forest. There's a shelter half a mile from here. Old CCC cabin built in the 30s. It has iron reinforcement in the doorframe. Iron interferes with their transformation. We'll be safe there. They ran together, Sarah leading. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew these trails intimately, and Ramirez followed blindly, trusting her experience. How many? He gasped. How many has it killed? 7 that we know of, but it's been here longer than that. Decades, maybe. The old-timers in Gatlinburg talk about people disappearing in these mountains going back to the 1920s. We thought it was just dangerous terrain, black bears, the usual explanations. But there were always weird details. Clothes found perfectly folded, tracks that changed from human to animal mid-stride, witnesses reporting impossible things. The cabin appeared through the trees, rough-hewn logs, slate roof, looking like it had grown from the forest itself. Sarah pushed through the door and Ramirez stumbled in after her, slamming it shut. There was indeed iron in the doorframe, old nails and strapping reinforcement from a time when builders knew things that modern construction had forgotten. We're safe, Ramirez panted. For now. Sarah moved to a window, peering out through gaps in the shutters. It can't cross iron in its transformed state, but it's patient. It'll wait. And eventually we have to leave. Ramirez finished. How do we fight it? Sarah turned to look at him and her expression was odd, sympathetic, sad, resigned. David, there's something you need to understand about skinwalkers. They're not just shapeshifters. They're witches, humans who gave up their humanity through terrible rituals. Murder, usually. Cannibalism. They break the deepest taboos and in exchange, they gain power. The ability to wear skins, to steal voices, to change forms. But they never stop being human underneath. That's what makes them so dangerous. They understand us, they know our fears, our weaknesses. They know exactly what to say, exactly how to act to make us trust them. Okay, but how do we? They also gain the ability to infect others. A scratch, a bite, sometimes just prolonged contact. The victim starts to change. Slowly at first. Thoughts that aren't their own, instincts that are too animal. Then physical changes. Extra joints, fur under the skin, bones that reshape themselves. Eventually, the original person is gone, replaced by something new, something that serves the original skinwalker. Ramirez felt cold spreading through his chest. Sarah, what are you saying? She smiled, and her teeth were wrong. Too sharp, too many, rows of them like a shark. I'm saying that I was infected 6 months ago, and I've been very, very patient, waiting for the right person to pass it to. Her face rippled, the skin split down the middle, peeling back to reveal something underneath. Dark fur, yellow eyes, a snout full of teeth. But parts of Sarah remained, her human features overlapping with the animal ones, creating something that hurt to look at directly. The real Sarah Chen is still in here, the thing said with Sarah's mouth. She's screaming, actually. Has been for months, but she's getting quieter every day. Soon she'll be gone completely, and then I'll just be me. But I need help, need more of us, need to spread, and you... Those terrible teeth gleamed. You're perfect, young, inexperienced, already isolated out here. By the time anyone realizes something's wrong, you'll have infected half a dozen others. Ramirez backed against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The cabin was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet. 1 door, 2 windows, no escape. Sarah's body continued to transform, clothes tearing as muscles reshaped themselves. She rose up to her full height. Over 7 feet now, hunched, arms too long and tipped with claws that looked like they'd been carved from bone. Don't fight, she said, voice layering. Sarah's voice, something else's voice. Voices of people long dead but still present in the creature's memory. It hurts less if you don't fight. And like Connor said, it feels good eventually. Natural. Right. You become something better than human. Something free. Ramirez's hand found his knife. Just a standard folder 4-inch blade, completely inadequate. But it was all he had. The iron in the door, he said desperately. You can't transform with iron nearby. You said so. I said it interferes with transformation. Makes it painful. But David, I'm already transformed. The iron just means I can't change back. Sarah's clawed hand reached for him. Now hold still. This will only hurt for a moment. Ramirez dove under her reach, rolling across the rough floor, coming up near the door. His fingers found the iron latch, and he yanked it open, spilling out into the fading afternoon light. Sarah shrieked, a sound that was part human scream, part animal howl, part something else entirely. She crashed through the doorway after him, but the iron had done something. Her transformation was reversing, fur receding, bones cracking back into human configuration. She fell to her knees, writhing, both human and animal, and neither. You can't run forever, she gasped. It's already in you. When I grabbed your shoulder. Ramirez looked down at his shoulder. His uniform shirt was torn where Sarah had grabbed him, and underneath his skin was wrong. Not quite his skin color. Darker, coarser. And when he focused on it, he could feel something moving underneath. Something burrowing deeper, spreading through his bloodstream like ice. Oh God, welcome to the family, Sarah said, her voice steadying as her body finished reverting to human form. She stood, naked and covered in blood, and smiling with teeth that were still too sharp. You've got maybe 6 hours before the change becomes permanent. 6 hours to decide, fight it and die screaming, or accept it and become something more. Ramirez ran again, but this time he was running from himself as much as from her. The forest was different now. He could smell things he shouldn't be able to smell. Other hikers miles away, their sweat and fear and excitement. He could hear heartbeats, the rush of blood through veins, the tiny sounds of prey animals hiding in underbrush. And he was hungry. Not normal hungry, but starving. A hunger so deep and primal that it made his previous life of sandwiches and protein bars seem like an absurd joke. His vision was changing too, colors bleeding together while movements became sharper. He could track the path of individual insects through the air, could see heat signatures of warm-blooded creatures through solid wood. The world was becoming readable in ways his human brain wasn't equipped to process, information flooding in faster than thought. He found himself near Cades Cove, the broad valley where Connor Burke had first seen the deer with human eyes. Sunset was painting the mountains gold and red, and below him a family was setting up camp. Mother, father, 2 kids, laughing and arguing about where to put the tent stakes. Normal people doing normal things, completely unaware that something wearing David Ramirez's skin was watching them from the tree line, calculating which one would be easiest to separate from the group, which one would scream the loudest, which one would taste best. No. Ramirez jerked back from those thoughts, horrified. They weren't his thoughts, couldn't be his thoughts. He was a park ranger. His job was to protect people, not hunt them like prey. The word felt right in ways that terrified him. His hands were changing now, fingers elongating, nails darkening into claws. He watched with detached horror as fur pushed through his skin, as bones restructured themselves with wet cracking sounds that should have been agony, but instead felt like relief, like shrugging off a coat that had always been too tight. He had 6 hours, Sarah had said. 6 hours to decide. But what if he didn't want to decide? What if he just let nature, or whatever this was, take its course? The family below had finished setting up their tent. The kids were playing tag, running in circles, so much energy, so much life. The father was starting a fire, the smell of lighter fluid sharp even from this distance. The mother was on her phone, probably checking the weather, making plans for tomorrow's hike. Tomorrow. Would Ramirez even be himself by tomorrow? His radio crackled one last time. Connor Burke's voice, or what remained of it. David, if you can still hear me, if you're still in there, you need to know something. I found a way to fight it, not to cure it. There's no cure, but to stop the spread. You have to... Static. before you lose control, before you infect others. It's the only way. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The transmission ended with a sound like bones breaking. Ramirez looked at his hands, half human, half something else. Looked at the family below. Looked at the darkening forest that was starting to feel more like home than any house ever had. 6 hours to decide between dying human or living as a monster. But there was a third option, wasn't there? The option Burke had found. The option that ended the infection before it could spread. Ramirez's fingers found his knife again. The blade caught the last rays of sunlight, throwing golden reflections across his transforming skin. Below, the family's laughter echoed through the valley, innocent and pure and completely unaware of how close death was standing. He thought about his mother in El Paso, his kid sister who'd just started college, his friends who'd thrown him a party when he got the ranger job. He thought about all the hikers he'd helped over the past 4 months, all the lost tourists he'd guided back to safety, all the campfires he'd doused and bears he'd hazed away from food storage. He'd taken this job to protect people, to preserve wilderness, to serve something bigger than himself. One last act of service, then. Ramirez looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. He wondered if Connor Burke had seen the same stars before making the same choice, wondered how many others had stood where he stood, feeling the change creep through their bodies, weighing the cost of their humanity against the seduction of transformation. The hunger was getting worse. His vision was almost entirely animal now, the world divided into prey and predators and nothing in between. The father below was weak, soft from office work, easy target. The mother would run, the kids would scream. It would be simple, natural, right? No. David Ramirez, 4 months and 6 days as a park ranger, 23 years old, raised Catholic though he hadn't been to Mass in years, took the knife in his trembling, fur-covered hand and pressed the blade against his throat. The last thing he thought before the blade bit deep was, "I'm sorry, Mom." The last thing he heard was laughter from the forest. Sarah's laughter, or Connor's, or his own, or something far older that had been laughing at human choices for centuries. The last thing he felt was relief that the hunger would finally stop. They found David Ramirez's body 3 days later, about 50 yards from the family's campsite. The family reported hearing an animal in distress that night but hadn't investigated. Smart decision, the investigating rangers agreed. Lots of dangerous wildlife in the Smokies. The official report listed Ramirez as a victim of a black bear attack, though several details didn't quite fit. The wounds were wrong, too clean, too deliberate. And there were no bear tracks, just human footprints that seemed to change mid-stride into something else, something with too many toes and joints that bent backward. The Park Service buried the inconsistencies along with the body. They hired a new ranger to replace Ramirez. Young woman from Colorado, bright-eyed and enthusiastic, ready for her first real assignment. She lasted 2 months before she stopped showing up for shifts. Her apartment was empty except for a pile of clothes folded neatly on the bed, and a note written in handwriting that didn't match her application forms. Gone to join the family. Don't look for me. Because some hungers can't be stopped, only spread. Some infections have no cure, only carriers. And some families grow one member at a time, patient and persistent, wearing faces that used to be human but aren't, haven't been, will never truly be again. In the deep hollows of the Great Smoky Mountains where tourists snap photos and children play, and families make memories, things move between the trees that park rangers have learned not to investigate too closely. The missing person statistics are acceptable, the disappearances explicable, the odd details easily dismissed. And every few months, when someone new joins the Park Service, young, inexperienced, isolated, those things in the forest watch and wait and smile with teeth that remember what it was like to be human. The hunger never stops. The family always grows. And David Ramirez, who chose to die rather than feed, became a story that skinwalkers tell each other as a joke. The one who thought death was an escape. The one who didn't understand that some hungers transcend even death, that some infections burrow so deep they reshape the soul itself. Because here's the secret they don't tell you. Ramirez didn't die. The blade stopped his transformation, prevented him from becoming fully skinwalker. But it didn't kill the infection, it just paused it. Trapped him in the in-between state. Neither human nor animal nor spirit. Unable to move on. Unable to transform. Unable to do anything but watch. His consciousness still inhabits that spot in the forest. Bound to the place where he died, aware of every hiker that passes, every family that camps nearby, every vulnerable person that wanders too close. He tries to warn them, tries to scream, tries to do anything to prevent what happened to him from happening to others. But all that comes out is wind through the trees, and the skinwalkers laugh because they know the cruelest truth of all. There is no escape. Not in life, not in death, not in anything between. Once the infection touches you, once the change begins, you belong to them forever. David Ramirez belongs to them forever. And someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 100 years, when the conditions are just right and someone vulnerable enough wanders past his trapped spirit, the infection will spark to life again. We'll find a new host. We'll continue spreading, because that's what skinwalkers do. They persist, they adapt, they infect, and they never ever stop hunting. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. "You let me drown," the voice said from behind Jennifer Nakamura, a child's voice, wet and hollow, speaking words that turned her blood to ice because she recognized it immediately. Recognized it despite 3 years of therapy, despite medication, despite moving to Washington specifically to escape the memories of that Montana lake, where 8-year-old Sophie Chen had gone under while Jennifer was supposed to be watching the swimming area. Jennifer spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the radio on her belt, but the Hall of Mosses trail stretched empty in both directions. Nothing but ancient Sitka spruce draped in moss so thick it looked like green waterfalls frozen in time. And the voice came again. Closer now, directly behind her left ear. "You let me drown, and now he's drowning too." Jennifer's breath came in short gasps, the sound too loud in the oppressive silence of the Hoh rainforest. Olympic National Park in October was always quiet, most tourists gone, the trails empty except for serious hikers. But this silence was wrong, absolute, as if every bird and insect had fled. The air felt heavy, saturated, water vapor so thick she could taste it. Her ranger uniform clung to her skin, soaked through from the constant mist that gave this place its reputation as the wettest location in the continental United States, receiving over 12 feet of rain annually. She was here because of Tyler Dawson's message. It had come through at 6:47 a.m., a voicemail left on the ranger station's emergency line, and Jennifer had listened to it 4 times before hiking out alone, against protocol, because something in Tyler's voice had triggered every instinct she'd developed during 5 years of backcountry work. The message had lasted 18 seconds. "This is Tyler Dawson, permit number 2847. I'm on the Hall of Mosses trail and something's wrong. There's water everywhere, but it's not raining, and I keep seeing..." Static. Then Tyler's voice again, higher, strained. "Oh God, she's wet. Why is she so wet?" Then silence. Then a sound like water rushing. Then the call dropped. Jennifer had tried calling back. No answer. She checked Tyler's permit. He was a landscape photographer from Seattle, experienced, well-equipped, camping legally at the Hoh River campground. His emergency contact was his sister in Tacoma. He'd been in the park for 3 days, shooting the autumn colors, and his permit was valid for another 4. The Hall of Mosses trail was a gentle loop, only 0.8 miles, elevation gain minimal, popular with families. Nothing dangerous, nothing that should have made Tyler Dawson sound terrified, but Jennifer knew terror when she heard it, knew the specific pitch of a voice confronting something the mind refused to process, because she'd made that sound herself 3 years ago, when she'd realized Sophie Chen had been underwater for 90 seconds, when she dove and found the girl tangled in submerged branches, when she'd pulled her up and tried CPR and failed while Sophie's mother screamed. Jennifer had been a lifeguard that summer working at Lake Mary Ronan, and Sophie's death had destroyed her. The investigation cleared her of negligence. Sophie had swum past the designated area, had ignored warnings, but guilt didn't care about official findings. Jennifer had quit, moved states, taken a job where she could help people, could prevent tragedies, could maybe balance the cosmic ledger. Except now she was hearing Sophie's voice in the rainforest and Tyler Dawson was missing, and the moss-draped trees seemed to lean inward, closing around her like a tunnel. Jennifer forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Auditory hallucinations were a symptom of PTSD. She'd experienced them before, especially under stress. This was her mind playing tricks. Nothing supernatural, nothing real. She pulled out her phone, iPhone 5, new that year, one of the first smartphones with decent cameras, and documented her position. The GPS showed her coordinates: 47.86007 degree N, 123.9356 degree W, elevation 578 feet. The time was 9:23 a.m., October 17, 2012. She continued up the trail looking for signs of Tyler. The moss here grew impossibly thick, on tree trunks, on fallen logs, on the trail itself. Everything was green, layered green, cathedral green, the kind of green that existed nowhere else on Earth. The Sitka spruce rose 200 feet overhead, their trunks 6 feet in diameter, giants that had been growing since before Columbus reached America. Between them, vine maples blazed red and gold, autumn colors that should have been beautiful but instead felt ominous like warning lights. Jennifer found Tyler's tripod first, 20 yards off trail, set up facing a massive nurse log, a fallen ancient tree hosting dozens of younger trees growing from its decay. The tripod was extended, positioned perfectly for a long exposure shot, but the camera was missing. Tyler's backpack leaned against a nearby tree, opened, contents spilling out. His water bottles, his food, his sleeping bag, all there. His wallet was there, his car keys were there, his phone was there, and it was soaking wet. Jennifer picked up the phone carefully, water dripping from it. The screen was cracked, the device clearly dead, but it hadn't been raining. The forest was misty, yes, but not wet enough to soak a phone this thoroughly. The moisture was wrong, too much, too sudden, as if the phone had been submerged. She documented the scene with photos, noting that Tyler's gear showed no signs of struggle. He'd set up his shot, removed his camera from the tripod, and then... what? Walked away without his phone, his wallet, his supplies. A sound reached her from deeper in the forest. Dripping water, steady and rhythmic. Jennifer turned toward it, her hand moving to her pepper spray. The dripping grew louder, impossible to ignore, and underneath it she heard something else. Breathing, ragged and wet, like someone with water in their lungs trying to draw air. "Tyler Dawson," Jennifer called out. "Ranger Nakamura, Olympic National Park. If you can hear me, respond." The breathing stopped. The dripping continued. And then, from the direction of the sound, a figure appeared between the trees. It was a woman. She wore a white dress that hung heavy with water, dripping constantly, leaving a trail of moisture on the moss. Her hair was black, long enough to reach her waist, and it too dripped steadily, streams of water running down her back. Her skin was pale, gray-tinged, the color of something that had been underwater too long. She stood perfectly still, 50 feet away, and her eyes were wrong, too large, too dark, reflecting nothing. Jennifer's training said to approach, to check if this was an injured hiker, but every instinct she possessed screamed to run. The woman in white didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Water pooled at her feet, spreading across the moss. "Ma'am, do you need assistance?" Jennifer's voice shook despite her efforts to control it. The woman tilted her head, the movement too sharp, too fast. Her mouth opened and water poured out. A torrent that shouldn't have been possible, gallons of it spilling onto the forest floor. When she spoke, her voice was Sophie Chen's voice, 8 years old, dead for 3 years. "You let me drown, Jenny. You looked away and I drowned. Now you'll watch him drown too. You'll watch everyone drown." Jennifer staggered backward, her radio falling from her belt. This wasn't real. This was trauma, PTSD, a hallucination brought on by stress and Tyler's disappearance. She closed her eyes, counted to 10, employed the grounding techniques her therapist had taught her. When she opened her eyes, the woman would be gone, revealed as a trick of light and shadow and guilt. She opened her eyes. The woman was closer, 30 feet away now, though Jennifer hadn't seen her move. More water poured from her mouth, from her eyes, from her hair. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees, Jennifer's breath misting in air that had been warm moments ago. "Not real," Jennifer whispered. "You're not real." The woman smiled, and her teeth were gray, coated in algae. "I'm real. I'm Yurei. I'm Onryo. I died with hatred in my heart, and hatred keeps me here. You know this, Jennifer Nakamura. Your grandmother told you the stories. You just refused to believe." Jennifer's grandmother had told her stories. Obasan's tales of Japanese ghosts, of women who died violently and returned seeking vengeance. Yurei in white burial kimonos, long black hair, seeking those who wronged them. Jennifer had dismissed them as folklore, as cultural mythology, nothing more. But her grandmother had been specific about the signs: the cold, the water, the presence of wetness where no moisture should be. Yurei were associated with water, with drowning, with floods. They appeared soaking wet, dripping endlessly, carrying the water that killed them. The woman, the Yurei, moved forward, and this time Jennifer saw the movement, saw how she glided rather than walked, her feet not quite touching the ground. Behind her, more figures appeared between the trees. A man in hiking clothes, water streaming from his mouth and nose. A woman in a park ranger uniform from the 1980s, her face bloated, her eyes clouded. A child no more than 5, water dripping from outstretched fingers. All of them dripping, all of them watching Jennifer with hatred. "The rainforest remembers," Sophie's voice said from the first Yurei's mouth. "The river remembers. All the ones who drowned, all the ones lost to water, we remember." Olympic National Park has taken 37 lives to water since 1938. Drownings in the Ho River, in Shusher Beach's riptides, in Lake Crescent's cold depths. We are all here. We are all angry, and he tried to photograph us. Understanding crashed over Jennifer like a wave. Tyler Dawson had seen them. He'd come to the rainforest to photograph the moss, the trees, the autumn colors, and he'd seen the Yurei. He'd tried to document them, and they'd taken him. "Where is he?" Jennifer demanded, fear transforming into ranger professionalism. "Where is Tyler Dawson?" The Yurei moved closer, 15 feet away now, and Jennifer could smell her. Stagnant water, decay, the particular rot of drowning. "He's where all who see us go. He's in the water, always in the water, drowning forever, never dying completely, trapped in the moment between life and death." Jennifer's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, saw a text message from an unknown number. The message was a photo. Tyler Dawson submerged in water, eyes open wide in terror, hands reaching upward toward a surface he couldn't reach. The metadata showed the photo was taken 3 minutes ago, at these exact coordinates. But there was no water here. The nearest river was half a mile away. Jennifer looked up from her phone, and the Yurei were closer, surrounding her in a tightening circle. The moss beneath her feet was sodden, water squelching with each step. The air itself felt liquid, hard to breathe, as if she was already underwater. "You let one drown," the Sophie-voiced Yurei said. "You must save this one, or join us. Those are the rules. Save him before the water takes him completely, or drown yourself in guilt and grief until you become like us. Onryo, bound to this place, seeking vengeance forever." The Yurei vanished, all of them simultaneously, dissolving into mist. The temperature rose, the oppressive wetness receded, and Jennifer stood alone on the trail, her heart hammering, her phone showing the photo of Tyler drowning in water that shouldn't exist. She had a choice. She could leave, get help, follow protocol, or she could find Tyler now while he might still be alive, while the Yurei's challenge remained open. Jennifer thought of Sophie Chen, of the 90 seconds that had killed her, of how Jennifer had failed to save her. She thought of 3 years of therapy, 3 years of guilt, 3 years of waking up drowning in phantom water. She couldn't fail again. Jennifer moved off trail, following the direction the Uri had indicated, pushing through ferns and moss toward the sound of running water. The forest grew darker, denser, the ancient trees blocking what little sunlight filtered through the constant cloud cover. Her boots sank into moss that was wetter than it should be, water pooling in her footprints. She found the river after 10 minutes of bushwhacking, a tributary of the Ho River, narrow but deep, moving fast with glacial melt. The water was gray-green, opaque, impossible to see into. And standing at the river's edge was Tyler Dawson. He was soaked, his photographer's vest heavy with water, his expensive Nikon camera still hanging around his neck. He stared at the river with the blank expression of someone in deep shock. His lips were blue. He was shaking violently. "Tyler!" Jennifer shouted. "Tyler Dawson, I'm Ranger Nakamura. Step away from the river." Tyler didn't respond. He took a step forward into the water, and Jennifer lunged, grabbing his arm, pulling him back. His skin was ice cold, hypothermic, and his eyes didn't focus on her. "She wants me," Tyler whispered. "She says I took her picture without permission. She says I stole her image. She says I have to pay." Jennifer dragged Tyler away from the river, her training overriding her fear. Hypothermia first, explanations later. She pulled emergency blankets from her pack, wrapped Tyler in reflective mylar, started documenting his condition. Core temperature dangerously low, cognition impaired, pupils responsive, but sluggish. "Tyler, how long have you been in the water?" "Hours, days, forever. She keeps pulling me under, and I drown, and then I'm breathing again, and she pulls me under again, over and over. I can't keep..." His words cut off as the river erupted. Water surged upward, defying gravity, forming a column, a shape, a woman rising from the current. This Uri was different from the others. Older, angrier, her white burial kimono pristine despite the water. Her face was beautiful and terrible, features sharp, expression full of rage. Around her neck hung prayer beads, and in her hand, she held a small cloth doll, the kind used in traditional Japanese funerals. "You photographed me," the Uri said, her voice layered, multiple voices speaking as one. "You pointed your machine at my resting place and captured my image without permission, without prayer, without respect. You have disturbed my peace. You must pay the price." Jennifer stepped between Tyler and the Uri, her mind racing through everything her grandmother had told her about Japanese ghosts. Uri couldn't be fought physically. They couldn't be killed. They were already dead, but they could be placated sometimes if you understood what they wanted. "What price?" Jennifer asked. "What would satisfy your vengeance?" The Uri's eyes fixed on Jennifer, black and bottomless. "You. The one who let a child drown. You carry guilt already. You carry water in your lungs, in your heart. You are halfway to becoming like me. Give yourself to the river, and I will release him." Jennifer felt the pull of the Uri's words, felt the truth in them. She did carry guilt. She did wake up drowning. Part of her had been underwater since Sophie Chen died. Maybe the Uri was right. Maybe drowning was what she deserved. She took a step toward the river. Tyler grabbed her arm, his grip weak, but desperate. "No, don't. She's lying. I've seen what she does. She takes and never stops. If you go in, we both die." Jennifer stopped, Tyler's words cutting through the Uri's hypnotic pull. She looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and saw someone who'd been terrorized for hours but was still fighting, still trying to help despite his own fear. "You're right," Jennifer said. She turned back to the Uri. "You say I carry guilt. You say I let a child drown. You're correct. I failed Sophie Chen. I'll carry that failure for the rest of my life. But I won't fail Tyler Dawson. I won't let you take him," the Uri screamed, and the sound was like water filling lungs, like the moment of drowning. like every nightmare Jennifer had experienced since Sophie's death. The river surged, waves crashing impossibly high, water reaching for them like grasping hands. Jennifer pulled Tyler backward away from the river's edge, but the water followed, spreading across the forest floor, rising inch by inch. The Ure multiplied, dozens of drowned spirits rising from the river, all of them moving toward Jennifer and Tyler with unified purpose. Jennifer's radio crackled. Impossible, it had fallen away earlier, and a voice came through speaking Japanese. Guangmin Jingen, Guangmin Jingen wo Changeo. The mantra of light. Chant to the mantra of light. Her grandmother's voice, dead for 2 years but unmistakable, and Jennifer remembered suddenly that her grandmother had given her something before she died. A small omamori charm, a protection amulet. Jennifer had kept it in her ranger vest's inner pocket, half forgotten. She pulled out the charm now, red fabric embroidered with gold, containing prayers written by monks at a shrine in Kyoto. Her grandmother had insisted she carry it, had said some dangers couldn't be fought with modern tools. The Uri recoiled, their advance stopping. The lead spirit, the one from the river, shrieked, her face distorting, becoming something monstrous. Buddhist prayers. You dare use sacred words against me? I dare use whatever works, Jennifer said. She didn't know the mantra of light by heart, but she knew other prayers, other words her grandmother had taught her. She began to speak, words in Japanese she barely understood, protective mantras, blessings for the dead. The Uri writhed, their forms becoming less solid, the water they commanded receding. But the lead spirit remained, her hatred palpable, and she pointed at Jennifer with a finger that dripped black water. You cannot save everyone, the Uri hissed. You will fail again. You will watch someone drown again. And next time the Omamori will not protect you. Next time I will take you both. The spirits dissolved. The water vanished as if it had never existed. And Jennifer and Tyler collapsed on suddenly dry moss, both of them shaking, both of them alive. Jennifer radioed for emergency extraction, called in Tyler's condition, requested immediate medevac. A helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, military fast, and took Tyler to Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles. Jennifer hiked out alone, collected Tyler's equipment, filed her report. The official record stated, visitor experienced hypothermia and disorientation after falling in tributary stream. Rescued by responding ranger. No permanent injuries. Recommended improved trail signage near water features. No mention of Uri. No mention of drowned spirits, no mention of Japanese ghosts haunting America's rainforests. But Jennifer knew, and Tyler knew. He left the hospital 2 days later, went home to Seattle, and never returned to Olympic National Park. He sold his camera equipment, switched careers, became a graphic designer who worked entirely indoors. When asked about his photographs from the Hoh rainforest, he said they'd been lost in a water accident. He never elaborated. Jennifer continued working as a ranger, but she researched everything she could find about Olympic National Park's drowning victims, all 37 of them since 1938. She learned their names, their stories, how they'd died. She visited their memorial sites when she could, left offerings, spoke prayers her grandmother had taught her, and she kept the Omamori with her always, because the Ure had been right about one thing. Jennifer would fail again someday. Everyone failed. Everyone let someone down. The question was whether you kept trying despite the failures, or whether you let guilt drown you while you still breathed. Jennifer chose to keep trying. But sometimes on foggy mornings when the mist hung thick over the Hoh rainforest, when the moss dripped endlessly and the river ran high, Jennifer heard Sophie Chen's voice calling from the trees, heard the accusations, the blame, the reminder of her failure. And sometimes she saw them, the Uri standing between the ancient trees, their white clothes dripping, their black hair trailing water, their eyes full of hatred and sorrow, watching her, waiting for her next failure, ready to drag her down into the water she'd been drowning in since Sophie died. The rainforest remembered. The water remembered. And the dead were patient. They had time. They had centuries. They would wait for Jennifer Nakamura to fail again, and when she did, they would be ready. And next time, no Omamori charm would save her from joining them in their endless, drowning rage. But until that day came, Jennifer would keep working, keep helping, keep trying to balance the ledger Sophie's death had unbalanced. She would save who she could save. She would fail when she failed. And she would live with both, because that was what being human meant. Carrying guilt and hope simultaneously, drowning and breathing at the same time, knowing the Uri waited, but refusing to surrender to them. The Hall of Moss's trail remained open. The river continued flowing. The rain kept falling. And in the deepest parts of the forest where the moss grew thickest and the light never fully penetrated, the drowned spirits waited, their patience infinite, their vengeance eternal, their wet footprints appearing on trails where no one walked, their voices calling to those who carried guilt, inviting them into the water, into the drowning, into the cold embrace of Onryo's eternal rage. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The voicemail was time-stamped 11:47 p.m., 3 hours after Madison Garcia had been declared missing, and Robert Fitzgerald could hear something breathing behind his daughter's terrified whisper. He played it again, the 5th time in as many minutes, his hands shaking as he pressed the phone against his ear. Madison's voice came through, barely audible over static that shouldn't exist on a digital recording. Dad, please. I don't know where I am. It's so dark. There's someone here, something. Dad, please find me, please, I'm so scared, The message cut off abruptly, replaced by 3 seconds of that breathing. Not labored breathing, not frightened breathing, steady, patient. The breathing of something that had all the time in the world. Robert checked the timestamp again, as though the numbers might have changed. 11:47 p.m., October 3rd, 2006. But Madison had been reported missing at 8:30 p.m. when she failed to return from a solo day hike on the Hoh River Trail. He'd received the call from Park Dispatch at 9:15 p.m., had been driving toward Olympic National Park ever since, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel for 3 hours of wet Washington roads. Madison couldn't have left that voicemail at 11:47 p.m. She couldn't have had cell service in the backcountry even if she'd wanted to. The Hoh rainforest had no towers, no reception, nothing but ancient trees and constant rain, and the kind of darkness that predated human understanding. But the message existed. Her voice existed. That breathing existed. Robert pulled into the ranger station at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center at 12:30 a.m. 2 rangers were coordinating the search, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, and a younger man whose name Robert forgot immediately. They had maps spread across a table, flashlight beams crisscrossing the topographic lines. "Mr. Fitzgerald," Patricia said, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd done this too many times. "We have teams sweeping the main trail. Your daughter's last known position was at the 5 Mile Island campsite. She signed the trail register at 2 p.m. Another hiker saw her around 3:30 p.m. heading back toward the trailhead, but she never arrived." "She called me," Robert said, holding up his phone. "After she was reported missing. After you called me. Listen to this." He played the voicemail. Both rangers listened, their expressions shifting from professional concern to confusion. "That's impossible," the younger ranger said. "There's no cell service anywhere on that trail. Even satellite phones are unreliable under the canopy. And yet here it is." Robert's voice was harder than he intended. My daughter's voice, asking for help. "Are we going to stand here discussing the impossibility, or are we going to find her?" Patricia held up her hands, placating. "We're doing everything we can. But Mr. Fitzgerald, you need to understand. The Hoh Rainforest is one of the most challenging search environments in the country. Limited visibility, dense vegetation, constant rain, and the river makes everything dangerous. We have experienced SR teams out there right now, but it's going to take time. Then let me help. I know these trails. I used to bring Madison here every summer when she was little. before the divorce, before she moved to Seattle with her mother. Robert's voice cracked on that last part and he hated himself for it. Please, she's 17, she's my daughter, I can't just sit here. The Rangers exchanged glances. Robert knew what they were thinking. Distraught parent, liability, someone else to worry about in already difficult conditions. But he also knew they couldn't legally stop him from entering a public trail. If you go out there, Patricia said finally, you stay on marked trails. You check in every hour on your radio. And if conditions deteriorate further, you come back immediately. Understood? Robert nodded, already moving toward his truck to grab his gear. He'd been a ranger himself once, 20 years ago, before Madison was born, before he'd taken the steadier job with the Forest Service that involved more desk work and less field time. He still maintained his wilderness first aid certification, still kept emergency equipment in his vehicle, still remembered the protocols even if his body was 20 years older. The rain was constant as he headed up the Hoh River Trail, his headlamp beam barely penetrating the darkness. The temperate rainforest pressed in from all sides, massive Sitka spruces and western hemlocks rising into invisible canopy, their trunks draped with club moss that glowed an eerie green in his light. The trail was a river of mud, and the actual Hoh River roared somewhere to his left, swollen from days of October rain. Robert tried Madison's cell phone every 5 minutes, knowing it was futile, but unable to stop himself. No service, no connection, just dead air, and the futile hope that somehow, impossibly, she might answer. He reached 5 Mile Island at 2 a.m. The campsite was empty, yellow caution tape marking where the search teams had already processed the scene. Robert ducked under the tape, not caring about protocols, and examined the area with his flashlight. Madison's backpack leaned against a moss-covered log. Robert's hands trembled as he opened it, inventorying the contents with a father's intimate knowledge. Her journal, the leather one he'd given her for her 16th birthday, a Canon point-and-shoot camera, water bottles, mostly full, energy bars, untouched, first aid kit, unused. Everything was here, everything except Madison. He opened the journal, flipping to the last entry. Her handwriting, recognizable and precious, filled the page. October 3rd, 3:00 p.m. Made it to 5 Mile Island. The forest is incredible, so green it hurts to look at. Found some interesting fungi specimens near the river. We'll photograph before heading back. There's something weird here, though. A smell, like copper and old meat, and the birds have stopped singing. Dad always said to trust instincts in the wilderness. Mine are screaming at me to leave. But I want to get photos of the fungi first. They're growing in a pattern I've never seen before, almost like a circle, like someone planted them deliberately. Later, the fungi circle is bigger than I thought, at least 20 feet across. There are bones in the center. Animal bones? They look old. There's writing carved into the trees around the circle. Not English. Not any language I recognize. Eastern European, maybe? I'm taking photos, but I'm getting seriously creeped out. Time to go. Later. Something followed me from the fungi circle. I can hear it in the trees. It's not moving like an animal. It's too deliberate, too intelligent. And the smell is stronger now. I'm heading back to the trail, going to walk fast and not look back. Dad, if you're reading this and I'm not around to stop you, I'm sorry for whatever you're about to go through. The entry ended there, mid-thought, as though Madison had been interrupted. Robert's radio crackled. Fitzgerald, this is base. Status check. I'm at 5 Mile Island, he said, his voice steady despite the ice in his stomach. Found her journal. Last entry mentions following something and fungi arranged in a circle with bones. I'm going to find this circle. Negative, Fitzgerald. That's off trail. Too dangerous in these conditions. Return to the marked trail. My daughter is out here somewhere. I'm finding that circle. He switched off the radio before Patricia could respond and pulled out Madison's camera. 47 photos on the memory card. He scrolled through them, his thumb wet from rain and shaking from something that wasn't cold. The first 30 photos were typical Madison. Artistic shots of moss patterns, light filtering through the canopy, the river in motion. Then the fungi appeared. Chanterelles, or something similar, growing in a perfect ring. The next photo showed the bones Madison had mentioned. Deer skulls, he thought at first, but the proportions were wrong, too elongated, too human. Photo 37 showed the carved trees. The symbols were crude but deliberate, and Robert recognized them from somewhere deep in his memory. 20 years ago, when he'd been a younger ranger, an older colleague had shown him similar markings. Old country superstitions, the man had said. Romanian immigrants who settled in the Pacific Northwest in the 1800s. They brought their folklore with them, their fears. This particular symbol is a ward, meant to trap something in, or keep something out. The final photos on Madison's camera made Robert's breath catch. They were blurred, taken while running, but he could make out shapes in the background. Humanoid but wrong. Too tall, limbs bent at incorrect angles, moving through the trees with a fluidity that suggested joints that didn't exist. And in the last photo, barely visible in the edge of the frame, a face. Pale, gaunt, with eyes that reflected the camera flash like an animal's. But the expression was human, intelligent, hungry. Robert's phone buzzed. Another voicemail. He fumbled it from his pocket, nearly dropping it in the mud. Dad. Madison's voice, but different now. Flatter. Don't come looking for me, it's too late, I'm already. I don't know what I am anymore. It bit me, Dad, at the circle. It bit me and then it showed me things. Memories. It's memories. Centuries of memories. People who came to the forest and never left. People it turned. People it made into what it is. A pause, filled with that same breathing from the first message. I'm so cold, Dad. But I'm not afraid anymore. Isn't that strange? I should be terrified, but I'm just empty and hungry, so hungry. You need to leave. You need to go back to Seattle and forget you had a daughter named Madison. Because what's walking around in this forest wearing my face isn't her anymore. The message ended. Robert stood frozen in the rain, the phone slipping from his numb fingers into the mud. A voicemail sent from a place with no cell service. A daughter who claimed she wasn't his daughter anymore. And somewhere in this rainforest, something ancient and evil that wore human faces and fed on human flesh. He found the fungi circle at 3:30 a.m., exactly where Madison's photos suggested it would be. The bones were still there, arranged with deliberate care around a central depression in the earth. The carved trees surrounded the clearing, their symbols weathered but still legible in his headlamp beam. And there were more bones now. Fresh ones, still red with tissue. Robert's radio crackled despite being turned off. Madison's voice came through the speaker, but wrong, layered with something underneath that sounded like grinding stone. Hello, Father. I'm glad you came. I wanted you to see. I wanted you to understand what I've become. Movement at the edge of the clearing. Robert spun, his headlamp catching a figure between the trees. Madison, or something wearing her shape. She wore the same hiking clothes she'd had on when she left Seattle yesterday morning. But they were torn and stained with mud and something darker. Her skin was pale, waxy, wrong in the artificial light, and her eyes reflected his headlamp beam, twin points of red that belonged to a predator, not a girl. Madison? His voice broke on her name. Not anymore. That name belongs to someone who died yesterday. Someone young and warm and alive. I remember being her. I remember loving you. I remember every summer in this forest. Every lesson you taught me about respecting the wilderness. But those memories feel like someone else's, like a story I was told. She stepped into the clearing, and Robert saw the bite mark on her neck. Deep, ragged, already infected with something that made the flesh around it look mottled and gray. What happened to you? The strigoi, she said, and the word felt heavy with age and horror. That's what it called itself. What it made me. The original one is old, Dad. So old. It came here with Romanian loggers in 1887, and it's been feeding on hikers and hunters ever since. The forest hides the bodies. The rain washes away the blood, and every few decades, when it gets lonely, it makes a new one. Someone to share the hunger with, someone to help it hunt. Robert's hand found the knife on his belt, though he knew with terrible certainty that a blade wouldn't help against what his daughter had become. "You're still in there," he said desperately. "Madison, you're still in there. We can get you help. Medical attention. There has to be a cure. Something. There is no cure for being dead, Dad." She moved closer, and Robert could smell her now. That copper and old meat scent from Madison's journal entry, mixed with decay and something else. Something that made his hindbrain scream warnings. "My heart stopped beating 12 hours ago. My blood is cold. My body is decomposing even as it walks and talks and pretends to be human. But the thing inside me, the infection or spirit or whatever it is, it keeps the meat animated, keeps it functional, keeps it hungry. Then fight it. You're strong, Madison. You're my daughter. You can fight this." She laughed, and the sound was wrong, pitched in a register that made his ears hurt. "I don't want to fight it. Don't you understand? The hunger is everything now. It's purpose. It's meaning. It's the only thing that makes this cold, dead existence bearable." More movement at the clearing's edge. Another figure, and then another. Bodies in various states of decay, all wearing the tattered remains of hiking gear from different decades. The Strigoy's other children, Robert realized. How many people had disappeared in Olympic National Park over the years? How many had been dismissed as lost hikers or animal attacks? "You brought friends," Madison said, following his gaze. "They're curious about you. My father, the ranger, the man who taught me to love these woods. They want to know if you taste different because of our connection, if love flavors the meat." Robert backed toward the edge of the clearing, his mind racing through impossible options. Run? He'd never make it. Fight? Against multiple undead predators, call for help? His radio was dead, his phone had no service, and even if rescue came, what could they do against this? "I don't want to hurt you, Dad," Madison said, and for just a moment her voice sounded like herself, young, frightened, human. "But the hunger, it's so strong, and you're right here, and you smell so alive." The other Strigoi were closing in, forming a circle around Robert. He counted 7 of them, including Madison. 7 dead things wearing human shapes, all focused on him with that same hungry attention. "What do you want from me?" Robert asked, surprised by how steady his voice remained. "If you're going to kill me, just do it. Don't make me watch my daughter become a monster first." "But that's exactly what I need you to see," Madison said. "The original Strigoi, the one who made me, it told me something important. It said the only way to truly turn is to feed on someone you loved in life, someone whose blood carries meaning. Without that, we're just corpses that walk. But with it, we become immortal, unkillable, eternal." Understanding hit Robert like a physical blow. "You need me." "I need you to choose," Madison corrected. "Let me feed, and I become something greater than human. Something that will walk these forests for centuries. Or stop me somehow and let me rot into the earth like I should have yesterday. Either way, you're not leaving this clearing alive. But you can choose what your death means." Robert's hand tightened on his knife. Could he use it on his own daughter? Even knowing she was already dead, even seeing what she'd become, could he drive a blade into her heart? One of the other Strigoi lunged forward, impatient. Robert spun, slashing with the knife, and felt the blade connect with cold, dead flesh. The creature recoiled, black fluid oozing from the wound, but it wasn't enough to stop it. Another Strigoi grabbed Robert's arm, its grip impossibly strong, fingers digging into his flesh with enough force to make bones creak. "Stop!" Madison's voice commanding. The other Strigoi froze, and the one holding Robert released him. "He's mine. My choice, my kill." She approached slowly, and Robert could see the struggle in her expression. Whatever Madison had been fighting against it, trying to hold on to the humanity that was slipping away with every passing moment. "I love you, sweetheart," Robert said quietly. "No matter what you've become, no matter what you do, you're still my daughter. You're still the little girl who used to collect mushrooms and name the trees and fall asleep during our camping trips with her head on my shoulder." Madison stopped, something flickering in those red reflecting eyes. Don't make this harder than it already is." "I'm not going to fight you," Robert said, making a decision that felt both insane and absolutely right. "If this is what you need, if feeding on me gives you, I don't know, peace, completion, whatever it is you're looking for, then do it. But know that I love you, that I've always loved you, that even now, standing here facing what you've become, I love you." He put down the knife, stood unarmed in the center of the clearing, waiting. Madison moved closer and Robert could see she was crying, dead eyes producing real tears that ran down waxy cheeks. You can't just give up. That's not who you are. You're supposed to be strong, supposed to survive, supposed to protect my daughter," Robert interrupted. "And I am. I'm protecting you from the guilt of taking a life against their will. I'm protecting whatever's left of the girl I raised from becoming a monster. You want my blood? It's yours. You've always had my heart anyway." The other Strigoi were stirring restlessly, but Madison held up her hand, keeping them back. She stood inches from Robert now, close enough that he could feel the cold radiating from her dead flesh. "I remember everything," she whispered. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every stupid argument about homework and curfews. I remember you teaching me to identify edible mushrooms when I was 6. I remember you crying at my 8th grade graduation. I remember the last time I told you I loved you 3 weeks ago, and I meant it even though I was mad at you for missing my art show." "I remember too," Robert said softly. "All of it. And I wouldn't trade a single moment, even knowing it led to this." Madison's hands rose to his throat, fingers cold as ice against his skin. Robert didn't flinch, didn't fight, just looked into his daughter's eyes and tried to see the girl he'd raised, tried to believe she was still in there somewhere. "I can't," Madison said suddenly, stepping back. "I can't do it. Even with the hunger screaming at me, even with every instinct demanding that I feed, I can't kill you. I'm still your daughter. I'm still Madison Garcia, who's afraid of spiders and loves pizza with pineapple and wants to study mycology at the University of Washington. I'm still her. I have to still be her." The other Strigoi moved then, no longer held back by Madison's command. They rushed forward in a coordinated attack, and Robert understood that if Madison wouldn't feed, they would. But Madison stepped between them and her father, her body shielding his, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that came from somewhere deeper than death. "No, he's under my protection. Mine. And I will tear apart anyone who touches him." The Strigoi hesitated, and Robert saw the hierarchy revealed. Madison was new, recently turned, but she was stronger somehow. The daughter of a ranger who'd loved these forests, maybe that meant something. Maybe that gave her power in this place. The oldest Strigoi stepped forward. A woman, or what had been a woman, dressed in rotted clothes from the 1950s. When she spoke, her voice was a chorus of the dead. "You reject the feeding? Then you reject the transformation. You'll decay, child. Rot from within. In a week, you'll be mindless. In a month, you'll be dust. The only thing that sustains us is human blood, human life. Without it, death takes us properly." "Then let it," Madison said. "I'd rather be dust than a monster who ate her own father." The old Strigoi laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "Sentimental foolishness. You'll regret it when the pain starts, when your body begins to truly decompose. You'll beg us to teach you to hunt." "I won't. I'll walk into the river. Let the water take me. Let me disappear like I should have yesterday." The Strigoi considered this, then nodded slowly. "So be it. But the father stays here. He's seen too much, knows too much. We can't let him leave." "Then I'll stay too," Madison said. "I'll watch over him. Make sure you keep your distance. And when I finally fall apart, when there's nothing left of me but bones, maybe he'll be brave enough to walk away then." The old Strigoi smiled, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. An interesting solution. Very well. We accept your terms. You and your father may remain in this clearing, but the moment you try to leave, the moment you break our agreement, we feed on you both, understood? Madison nodded, and the other Strigoi melted back into the forest, vanishing between the trees as though they'd never been there. The clearing fell silent except for the constant rain and the distant roar of the Ho River. Robert sank to the ground, his legs finally giving out. What just happened? I bought us time, Madison said, sitting beside him. Maybe a week, maybe less. My body is already breaking down, I can feel it. Everything's starting to hurt in ways that living bodies don't hurt. And the hunger. Dad, the hunger is like having fire in my veins. But I'm not going to feed. I'm not going to become what they are. There has to be another way. Some way to stop this, to reverse it. There isn't. The old stories are true, Dad. The Strigoi legend, the vampire myths, they're all based on something real, something that spreads through bites and turns the dead into predators. The only cure is destruction. Fire or decapitation, according to the memories I inherited. And I don't have the courage to ask you to do that to me. Robert pulled his daughter close, not caring that her body was cold, that she smelled of decay, that she wasn't entirely human anymore. She was still Madison, still his little girl. And he had 1 week to figure out how to save her, or how to let her go. The rain continued through the night. Robert held Madison as she shook with the effort of resisting the hunger, as her body slowly deteriorated, as the infection that had killed her worked to remake her into something monstrous. She told him everything, about the original Strigoi, about the bite, about the moment her heart stopped and something else started. She described the hunger in terms that made Robert's stomach churn and his heart break. By dawn, she was weaker. Her skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and the bite wound on her neck was spreading, the infection radiating outward in black veins. She couldn't stand without help, and her voice was fading. "Dad," she whispered as pale morning light filtered through the canopy. "You need to do it. You need to end this. I won't last much longer, and when I finally lose control of the hunger, I'll attack you. I won't be able to stop myself. Please." While I'm still me enough to ask, Robert's hands shook as he picked up his knife. "I can't. Madison, I can't. You have to. It's the only mercy left, the only way to make sure I don't hurt anyone else. Please, Dad, do this one last thing for me." He thought about all the moments of her life. First steps, first day of school, first heartbreak. Teaching her to identify plants, to read a compass, to respect the wilderness. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee kissed better. Every teenage argument that seemed so important at the time. 17 years of being her father, and it all came down to this. One impossible choice in a rainforest clearing. "I love you," Robert said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I love you too, Dad. Thank you. For everything. For being the best father a girl could ask for. For teaching me to love the forest even though it killed me. For coming to find me even though you knew it was dangerous. For being here at the end." Robert pressed the knife against Madison's heart, his vision blurred with tears. She put her cold hand over his, helping him hold steady, and smiled. It was her real smile, the one he remembered from happier times. "It's okay," she said softly. "It's okay to let me go." He pushed the blade home in one quick motion, the way he'd been trained to field dress game, making it fast and clean. Madison gasped once, her eyes going wide, and then the red reflection faded from them. Whatever had been keeping her animated, the Strigoi infection or spirit or curse, released its hold. She collapsed against him, and this time when she died, it was final. Robert held his daughter's body and wept. He wept for the life she'd never have, for the future stolen from her, for the impossible choice he'd been forced to make. He wept until there were no more tears, and then he simply sat, numb and hollow as the rain continued to fall. The old Strigoi appeared at the clearing's edge as the sun rose higher. She regarded Robert with something that might have been respect. "You kept your word," she said. She kept hers. We'll honor the agreement. You may leave. Just like that? After everything? Just like that. Your daughter chose nobility over hunger. That's rare among our kind. She deserves to be honored, not consumed. Bury her deep, Ranger. Make sure she stays buried. The infection dies with the host, but only if the body is properly laid to rest. Robert dug for hours, using his knife and bare hands to carve a grave in the soft forest floor. He wrapped Madison in his jacket, placed her journal and camera beside her, and covered her with earth and stones. No marker, no ceremony. Just a father burying his daughter in the forest she'd loved. He walked out of Olympic National Park at sunset, muddy and exhausted and forever changed. At the ranger station, Patricia took one look at him and asked no questions. She filed a report stating that Madison Garcia's body had been recovered and buried in accordance with family wishes in the backcountry, which was true enough. The official cause of death was listed as animal attack. Robert never spoke about what really happened in that clearing. He returned to his desk job with the Forest Service, went through the motions of living and tried to forget. But on October nights when the rain fell hard and he couldn't sleep, he thought about Madison, about her courage in resisting the hunger, about her choice to die human rather than live as a monster. He kept her journal but never read past that last entry. Some words were too painful to revisit. He kept her camera, but never looked at the final photos again. Some images were better left forgotten. Years later, when Robert finally retired, he donated a large sum to Olympic National Park for trail maintenance and safety equipment. Anonymous, no recognition required. It was the only memorial he could give Madison, making sure future hikers were safer, that other families wouldn't suffer what he'd endured. But he never returned to the Hoh rainforest, never hiked those trails again. The place held too many ghosts, too many memories, too much pain. The forest had taken his daughter and forced him to mercy kill her animated corpse. Some wounds didn't heal, some choices haunted you forever. On the anniversary of Madison's death every year, Robert received a single voicemail. No number, no timestamp, just his daughter's voice saying 6 words. "Thank you, Dad. I love you." Each year he listened, and each year he wept, and each year he wondered if it was truly her spirit reaching out, or just his grief manifesting in impossible ways. He never figured out the answer, and maybe that was appropriate. Madison's last days had been defined by the impossible made real, by folklore proved fact, by the thin line between life and death revealed as far more permeable than science acknowledged. Robert Fitzgerald died in 2031, an old man with a quiet life and a secret that crushed him. His last words, according to the hospice nurse, were, "I'm coming, sweetheart. Dad's coming." Whether he was reunited with his daughter in whatever came after, or whether death was simply the end, no one could say. But in Olympic National Park, deep in the Hoh rainforest, a grave sits unmarked and undisturbed. And on October nights when the rain falls and the darkness presses close, some hikers report hearing a young woman's voice calling for her father. The rangers dismiss it as wind or imagination. But those who've spent time in the deep wilderness know better. They know that some bonds transcend death, that love persists even when bodies fail, that in places old and wild and saturated with blood and sorrow, the past never truly releases its grip on the present. Madison Garcia died at 17 in 2006. Her father died 25 years later. And somewhere in the space between, in the dark places where folklore and reality blur, a daughter waited for her father to find her one last time. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The pattern in the bark shouldn't have been possible. Robert Fitzgerald had spent 15 years walking these trails in Olympic National Park, had memorized the grain of every Douglas fir and Sitka spruce within 20 miles of the Hoh Rainforest Ranger Station, and he knew with absolute certainty that wood didn't grow in perfect spirals. Yet here it was on a western hemlock. Tight concentric rings carved deep into the trunk, each groove exactly 3/4 of an inch from the next, ascending 12 feet up the tree before terminating in a symbol that looked disturbingly like an eye. He pressed his palm against the bark. The wood was warm. It was 42 degrees this November morning, drizzle filtering through the canopy in that persistent Olympic Peninsula way that soaked through everything, and the tree felt like sun-heated stone. Fitzgerald pulled his hand back and reached for his radio, then stopped. He'd call this in and they'd send McCarthy, who'd been with the Park Service for 8 months and still got excited about unusual wildlife sightings. Or worse, they'd send Chen from the Seattle office, who'd want to make it a whole thing. Photographs, forestry reports, maybe even bring in someone from the university. And it was probably nothing. Probably teenagers with too much time and a woodworking kit. Though that didn't explain the warmth or the fact that he was 9 miles from the nearest trailhead. Jordan Hayes had disappeared from this area 4 days ago. 24 years old, experienced backpacker, carrying a Garmin GPS Map 60 CSX and a satellite phone that had transmitted its last signal at 1:47 a.m. on November 8th from coordinates that put him less than half a mile from where Fitzgerald now stood. The signal had cut out mid-transmission, not gradually, not with the static decay of dying batteries, but instantly. 1 second transmitting, the next gone. Hayes was the fourth. Fitzgerald didn't like thinking about it in those terms, but facts were facts. September 2010. Marcus Whitmore, solo hiker, vanished near Bogachiel Peak. His tent was found intact, sleeping bag still zipped, boots placed neatly beside the entrance. March 2011. Catherine Rodriguez, wildlife photographer, disappeared along the Hoh River Trail. Her camera was recovered 3 weeks later. Memory card blank despite her husband insisting she'd taken over 300 photos that day. July 2011. David Park, experienced mountaineer, went missing on a routine supply run to the Olympus guard station. They found his backpack hanging from a tree branch 40 feet up, contents undisturbed, straps showing no signs of climbing damage. Now, Jordan Hayes. 4 disappearances in 18 months was statistically impossible in Olympic. They averaged 1 missing person case every 3 years, and those almost always ended with someone walking out embarrassed after getting turned around on a trail. But these 4, they'd simply ceased to exist. No bodies, no evidence of animal attacks, no signs of foul play. Just gone, as if the forest had opened and swallowed them whole. The spiral pattern caught the weak morning light, and Fitzgerald noticed something else. Between each groove, smaller marks, not carved but burned, tiny symbols that looked like letters from an alphabet he didn't recognize. Cyrillic, maybe, or something older. He pulled out his phone to take a picture, then remembered he'd lost signal 6 miles back. The iPhone 4 was supposed to work anywhere, according to the commercials, but the Hoh rainforest laughed at those promises. Movement in his peripheral vision made him turn. Nothing there. Just the usual cathedral of moss-draped trunks and sword ferns. The forest floor covered in that thick emerald carpet that made the Olympics look like something from a fairy tale. Except fairy tales were starting to feel less whimsical and more like warnings. He noticed the trees then. Really noticed them. The Douglas firs around him weren't growing in the random scatter of natural forest. They formed a circle, maybe 60 feet in diameter, with the marked hemlock at the center, and each of the outer trees showed signs of interference. Stripped bark in vertical lines, branches broken at uniform heights, roots exposed in patterns that suggested deliberate excavation. Fitzgerald had worked search and rescue operations in 6 states before settling in Washington. He'd found lost hikers, recovered bodies from avalanches, talked down a suicide attempt on Hurricane Ridge, and once spent 36 hours tracking a confused Alzheimer's patient through the Cascades. He'd seen what animals could do to human remains, what weather could do to abandoned campsites, what time and decomposition looked like in a dozen different environments. He considered himself unshakable. His hands were trembling. The radio on his belt crackled. Not with a voice, but with a sound like wind through a pipe organ, low and resonant and completely wrong for the equipment. He yanked it free, but the sound continued even after he powered it off. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, a vibration in the wood that he felt more than heard. Then it stopped. In the sudden silence, Fitzgerald heard something else. Footsteps. Human footsteps. boots on wet earth, coming from deeper in the circle of trees. He spun, hand instinctively moving to the canister of bear spray on his belt. Nothing. The footsteps continued, circling him now, staying just out of sight behind the massive trunks. He could hear breathing too, ragged, desperate, like someone who'd been running for hours. "Park Service," Fitzgerald called out, his voice steady despite the ice spreading through his chest. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. The breathing continued, harsh and wet. "Jordan Hayes," Fitzgerald tried. "Jordan, if that's you, you're safe now. We've been looking for you." The breathing shifted location instantly, 1 second in front of him, the next behind. Impossible. No one could move that fast without making noise. "This isn't funny," Fitzgerald said, but his voice sounded thin now, uncertain. "If you need medical attention..." A branch snapped directly behind him, close enough that he should have felt breath on his neck. He spun again, backpedaling, and his boot caught on an exposed root. He went down hard, the impact driving air from his lungs. When he looked up, gasping, there was a figure standing at the edge of the circle. Not Jordan Hayes. Not human. It stood 7 feet tall, proportions all wrong. Torso too long, arms reaching almost to the ground. Legs bent backward at joints that shouldn't exist. But the worst part was the skin, or what Fitzgerald's brain kept insisting was skin despite the texture being completely wrong. It looked like bark, like the thing was covered in layers of stripped wood, gray and brown and green with moss growing in the creases. The head was the worst, a rough approximation of a human skull but stretched and hollowed, with deep holes where eyes should be and a jaw that hung too low, revealing darkness inside instead of a throat. Fitzgerald's training screamed at him to catalog details, to observe and remember, because this was evidence. This was real. But his hindbrain was screaming louder. Predator. Run. Die. The thing tilted its head, that inhuman jaw working like it was tasting the air. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. From the trees, from the earth, from inside Fitzgerald's own skull. Lesovik vidish tebe. Fitzgerald didn't speak Russian, didn't speak whatever language that was, but he understood the meaning anyway. The forest sees you. Then it was gone. Not running, not moving, just gone, like it had never existed. Fitzgerald scrambled to his feet, heart slamming against his ribs. The circle of trees looked normal now, just forest, just wood and moss and fern. But the spiral-carved hemlock remained, and the symbols between the grooves seemed to glow faintly in the gray morning light. He ran. Training and pride be damned, he ran, crashing through undergrowth, following his GPS back toward the trail. Behind him, he heard laughter, children's laughter, high and clear, and completely wrong for this deep wilderness. It followed him for half a mile before fading into the sound of wind through branches. Fitzgerald didn't stop running until he reached the trail junction at milepost 15, where a family of 4 was consulting a map. They looked at him strangely, this wild-eyed ranger, uniform soaked with sweat and rain, breathing like he'd just sprinted a marathon. "You okay?" the father asked. Fitzgerald nodded, not trusting his voice. His radio crackled, this time with actual static, and the dispatcher's voice came through clear. "Fitzgerald, you copy? We've got eyes on Hayes' satellite signal. It just came back online." He grabbed the radio so hard his knuckles went white. "Where?" "Same location as before. Same coordinates where he disappeared." "That's impossible. I was just there." "Signal's active right now, Rob. Strong and clear. He might still be alive." Fitzgerald looked back the way he'd come. The forest was perfectly still, perfectly silent, waiting. "Copy that," he heard himself say. "I'm heading back." The family watched him jog back up the trail, the father shaking his head and muttering something about government employees. If they'd looked closer, they might have noticed the way Fitzgerald kept glancing over his shoulder, or the way his hand never left the bear spray canister, or the way he seemed to be talking to himself, lips moving in what looked like a prayer. What they definitely didn't notice was the figure watching from the tree line, tall and impossible, covered in bark and moss, tilting its head as it studied the ranger's retreating form. The satellite signal was coming from exactly where Fitzgerald had stood an hour earlier, in the center of that impossible circle of trees. But when he arrived, breathless and terrified, despite every professional instinct telling him to stay calm, there was no Jordan Hayes. No body, no equipment, no sign anyone had been there except for a single item lying precisely in the middle of the circle. A Garmin GPS map, 60CSX, Hayes's model, screen displaying coordinates, and a blinking icon indicating active transmission. Fitzgerald approached carefully, scanning the tree line for movement. The carved hemlock looked different now. The spiral pattern had spread, covering more of the trunk, and the symbols between the grooves were definitely glowing. A faint, bioluminescent green that made him think of deep-sea creatures. He picked up the GPS unit. The screen showed Hayes's last recorded waypoint, labeled Camp 6, dated November 8th, 1:47 a.m., exactly when the signal had cut out. But there was another waypoint, created just minutes ago, labeled simply Dom. Fitzgerald didn't recognize the word, but his phone had enough signal here to load a translation app. He typed in the Cyrillic letters. Dom. Home. The GPS unit's compass began spinning wildly, needle whirling through all directions before stopping, pointing at nothing, or at something Fitzgerald's eyes couldn't see. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. His breath misted. Ice crystals formed on the ferns around him. The breathing was back. That ragged, desperate sound, but now it came from multiple directions. Footsteps too, dozens of them, circling the clearing in a pattern that grew tighter with each revolution. Fitzgerald spun, trying to track the movement, but there was nothing to see. Just trees and moss and the growing certainty that he'd made a catastrophic mistake coming back here alone. "Jordan," he shouted, and his voice echoed wrong, bouncing back in fragments that sounded like laughter. "Jordan Hayes, if you can hear me." A hand grabbed his ankle. He looked down and saw fingers. Human fingers, pale and dirt-covered, emerging from the earth itself. They gripped tight enough to bruise, and more hands erupted from the ground around him, dozens of them reaching and grasping. Fitzgerald kicked free and staggered backward, but the hands kept coming, forming a circle around the clearing, preventing escape. Then the thing from before stepped out from behind the hemlock. The forest guardian, the leshy, the impossible thing that wore bark like skin. It was larger now, or Fitzgerald was seeing it more clearly. 9 feet tall, massive, with antlers growing from its skull-like head. The antlers were decorated with objects: a watch, a camera lens, a tattered piece of fabric that looked like part of a tent. Trophies. Tai Narushaish. The voice came from everywhere, accusatory and ancient. Tai Baresh. Tai Razrushaish. You trespass. You take. You destroy. Fitzgerald's hand found his radio, but when he tried to transmit, only that pipe organ sound came out, growing louder, resonating through his bones until his teeth ached and his vision blurred. The hands from the earth were pulling themselves up now, attached to arms, to bodies that shouldn't exist, human shapes covered in roots and moss, faces that might have once been Marcus Whitmore, Catherine Rodriguez, David Park, and others he didn't recognize. Dozens of others. The forest had been collecting. The leshy moved forward with that wrong articulation, joints bending in directions that made Fitzgerald's brain hurt. It reached out one massive hand, and Fitzgerald saw that the fingers were actually bundled twigs, bound together with what looked like human hair. He did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed Hayes's GPS and hurled it at the carved hemlock. The device shattered against the trunk, plastic and electronics spraying across the spiral pattern. The glowing symbols flared bright, and the leshy shrieked, not in pain but in rage, a sound like trees splitting in a hurricane. The hands released him. The earth-covered figures retreated, sinking back into the ground. The leshy turned its attention to the damaged tree, running its twig fingers over the broken spiral as if assessing a wound. Fitzgerald ran. Again. But this time he understood. This wasn't about courage or duty or finding Jordan Hayes. This was about survival. The forest had rules, old rules, and he'd broken them by coming here, by continuing to come here, by bringing noise and civilization and the arrogance of believing humans had dominion over ancient places. He crashed through undergrowth, following the compass in his brain more than any trail, and he didn't stop until he reached the parking lot at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center. His truck sat where he'd left it that morning, covered in a thin layer of condensation that reflected the afternoon sun. Afternoon. He'd left at 6 a.m. It should have been noon at latest, but his phone showed 4:37 p.m. He'd lost 10 hours somewhere in those woods. The park superintendent was waiting for him, along with 2 state police officers and a search and rescue team. They looked relieved when he appeared, then concerned as they took in his appearance. Mud-covered, scratched, eyes wild. "Rob," Superintendent Patterson said carefully, "we've been trying to reach you for hours. Your radio's been transmitting nothing but static. Are you hurt?" Fitzgerald looked down at himself. His uniform was shredded in places, scratches covering his arms that he didn't remember getting. One of his boots was gone, lost somewhere in the flight. His hands were bleeding from a dozen small cuts. "Hayes," he managed. "Did you find Jordan Hayes?" Patterson's expression shifted to something like pity. "Rob, we found Hayes 3 hours ago. He walked out at the Spruce Nature Trail, dehydrated and hypothermic but alive. He says he got turned around, spent 3 days trying to find his way back to the trail. Standard lost hiker protocol. His GPS. He lost his GPS the first day, dropped it crossing a stream. That's what he told us. But the signal... There was no signal, Rob. Dispatch never reported any satellite transmission. When you requested backup to return to the search area, they thought you were just being thorough. They didn't know you were..." Patterson paused. "They didn't know you were in distress." The world tilted. Fitzgerald grabbed the hood of his truck to steady himself. "But I heard them. The dispatcher said Hayes' GPS came back online. I talked to dispatch myself. They never said that." One of the state police officers stepped forward, hand resting casually on his duty belt. "Mr. Fitzgerald, we'd like you to come with us to the hospital. Get you checked out, make sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "You're missing a boot and you've been unresponsive to radio contact for 10 hours. You're not fine." Patterson put a hand on Fitzgerald's shoulder, a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting but felt like a judgment. "Take a few days off, Rob. Get some rest. These woods can mess with your head if you're not careful." They drove him to Forks Community Hospital, where a tired doctor examined his scratches, treated him for mild exposure, and suggested he talk to someone about stress management. The state police asked careful questions about drugs and alcohol, which Fitzgerald answered honestly. He didn't drink on duty, hadn't taken anything stronger than ibuprofen in months. They released him at midnight with paperwork about mandatory counseling and a suspended duty status pending psychiatric evaluation. Patterson drove him home personally, making small talk about nothing that Fitzgerald barely heard. His house was dark and empty. He'd been divorced 2 years. Karen had gotten tired of the long hours and the isolation of Olympic Peninsula life. No kids, no pets, just him and a mortgage on a cabin that looked out at the same forest that had nearly swallowed him. Fitzgerald showered, watching dirt and blood swirl down the drain. His hands were still shaking. He couldn't stop seeing those earth-covered figures, couldn't unhear that voice speaking in Russian or whatever ancient language the forest remembered. He dried off and checked his phone. 7 missed calls from Patterson, 3 from the hospital, 1 from his sister in Portland, and a text from a number he didn't recognize, sent at 1:47 a.m., the exact time Hayes' GPS had supposedly cut out 4 days ago. The text was one word in Cyrillic. Dom. Home. Fitzgerald deleted it, then deleted it from the trash folder, then deleted the entire thread. But when he opened his photos to distract himself, he found images he didn't remember taking. The spiral carved hemlock from a dozen angles, close-ups of the glowing symbols, a video he absolutely did not remember recording. He tapped the video. It was 43 seconds of forest floor, the camera apparently lying on the ground, pointed up at the canopy. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then a shadow passed across the lens, something huge, something moving with that wrong articulation. And in the last 3 seconds before the video ended, A face leaned into frame. Not the bark-covered leshy face. A human face. Jordan Hayes's face, or what remained of it. Eyes gone, replaced with smooth bark. Mouth open in a scream that produced no sound. Skin transitioning to wood. The transformation incomplete, caught between human and tree. The video ended. Fitzgerald dropped his phone like it had burned him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his kitchen with every light on, drinking coffee he didn't taste, trying to convince himself it was all hallucination, stress-induced psychosis, anything but the truth crawling under his skin. At 3:47 a.m., his doorbell rang. He didn't answer it. He sat frozen in his chair, listening to the sound repeat every few minutes, perfectly timed. Between each ring, he heard footsteps on his porch, slow, heavy, the creak of wood on wood. At dawn, the sound stopped. When enough light filtered through the windows that he felt brave enough to look, he found boot prints on his porch. They were filled with moss and soil, and they led from his front door to the tree line at the edge of his property, where they simply stopped. Fitzgerald called Patterson and quit, over the phone before he could change his mind, making up something about family emergency and needing to relocate. Patterson sounded relieved more than anything, probably glad to avoid the paperwork of a formal dismissal. He packed that morning. Clothes, laptop, personal items. He left the uniform, the equipment, everything that connected him to Olympic National Park. He'd go to Portland, stay with his sister, find work doing something that didn't involve forests or wilderness or places where humans weren't meant to go. But as he loaded the last box into his truck, he noticed something carved into the driver's side door. Fresh marks deep in the paint, forming a spiral pattern that ascended from the handle to the window, and between each groove those same glowing symbols, pulsing faint green in the morning light. He traced them with one finger. The metal was warm. Inside the truck's cab, his phone chimed. Another text from that unknown number. This time it was a photo. The spiral-carved hemlock, but with something new added to the pattern. Near the top, where the spiral formed that eye-like symbol, a name had been carved in English letters. Robert Fitzgerald. Below it, in smaller letters, Dom Zovet. He didn't need the translation app this time. He understood. Home calls. Fitzgerald stood in his driveway, truck packed, escape route planned, safety just a few hours' drive away. Behind him, the forest waited, patient, eternal, already preparing space for him in its collection. He could run to Portland, could run to California or Alaska or anywhere humans built cities and pretended they'd conquered the wild. But the marks on his door would follow. The voice in the trees would follow. The forest always collected its debts. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across his property. The shadows didn't match the trees that cast them. They formed patterns, spirals and symbols, a language written in darkness that marked him as clearly as any brand. Robert Fitzgerald, 15-year veteran of the Park Service, survivor of dozens of rescue operations, man who'd thought he understood these woods, finally accepted the truth. He'd never been the one doing the searching. The forest had been searching for him all along, and now it had found him. He got in his truck anyway, started the engine, put it in drive. Because humans are stubborn creatures who cling to hope even when hope is just another path deeper into the dark. The GPS screen flickered as he pulled onto Highway 101, and for a moment, instead of the route to Portland, it showed that impossible waypoint again. Dom. The compass needle spun wild, then stopped, pointing back the way he'd come, toward the forest, toward home. Fitzgerald drove south anyway, one hand white-knuckled on the wheel, the other resting on the bear spray he knew wouldn't help. In his rearview mirror, the Olympic mountains rose against the gray sky, and in the tree line beside the road, shadows kept pace with his truck. Impossibly tall, jointed wrong, watching him go with patience that measured time in centuries. He'd make it to Portland. He'd find an apartment far from any wilderness, surrounded by concrete and streetlights. He'd take medication if they prescribed it, undergo therapy, accept whatever diagnosis they gave him. He'd do everything right. But on winter nights, when the rain hammered against his windows and the city seemed to fade into memory, he'd hear it. That pipe organ sound resonating through the walls, footsteps in the hallway outside his door, and laughter. Children's laughter that came from mouths that had forgotten how to be human. The forest was patient. It had collected for centuries before him, and it would collect for centuries after. It had rules older than nations, claims that predated ownership, and a memory that stretched back to when the world was young and humans understood their place in the hierarchy of things. Robert Fitzgerald had walked into that cathedral of ancient trees, thinking he was the guardian, the protector, the ranger who kept the forest safe from people. He drove away knowing the terrible truth. He'd never been guarding anything. He'd been trespassing in a place that tolerated human presence only as long as humans remembered what they were. Guests, temporary, collectible. 3 months later, a hiker would find his truck abandoned on a logging road outside Quilcene, keys still in the ignition, doors locked, windows intact. The GPS unit would be displaying a single waypoint labeled DOM, and carved into every tree within a 100-foot radius, those same spiral patterns would ascend the trunks, marking the territory of something far older than Park Service jurisdiction. By then, Robert Fitzgerald would be part of the collection. Another face in the earth, another warning ignored, another name carved in wood that would outlast memory. The forest always collected its debts, and it never forgot to call its children home. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.